the top story today on the Wall Street Journal and in the country is what's happening with the economy, inflation, and the Journal reporting this morning about how people are buying more essentials at dollar stores than ever before. Yet the Biden administration continues to insist if you have fears over the economy, you're just thinking about it all the wrong way. You see, things are great. You just don't know it. My first guest is saying this is nothing short of Orwellian, the weird, coordinated messaging between the administration and its media sycophants, the lemmings who just follow whatever they're told to say by the Biden administration. Peter Schiff is the CEO and Chief Global Strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital. He joins me now. Peter, so great to have you back. It is Orwellian because, we've spent the past, 20, 30, 40 years being told this is what makes a recession. And the past, week, less than, being told, forget everything we ever told you. The rules are different now that we have a Democrat in the White House.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not just 20 or 30 years. I mean, it's kind of always been described as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. And we didn't hear differently until about, less than a week before they released the official numbers for the second quarter. And obviously, the Biden administration was leaked that GDP report. They knew in advance that it was going to be negative. And it wasn't until then that they came out with this ridiculous explanation or excuse that 2 negative quarters of GDP do not constitute a recession, because prior to that knowledge, they were pretending we had a strong economy. They kept talking about how strong the economy was. Well, it's been in recession the entire year.
Absolutely. And so now with the official numbers coming out, second quarter gross domestic product fell 0.9%, though it was expected to rise 0.3%. We get a very different sounding message. Now, I just, want the audience to understand the administration made perfectly clear, just like Peter did and like everybody did, what would mean we're in a recession. And that is 2 consecutive periods, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. They've been saying that all along. Even the Biden administration officials have been saying that. It wasn't until it actually happened to him that they and their media allies completely changed, did a 180, and started to say it's a very different story. Okay, so here's the first soundbite. It's soundbite 1. You can hear the media and Biden administration officials trying to tell us black is not black, white is white, not white. This is okay. So this is actually all Biden admin officials. So take a listen to them.
I mean, if the technical definition is 2 quarters of contraction, you're saying that's not a recession?
That's not the technical definition.
2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of recession.
The idea that 2 quarters of negative GDP growth is a technical definition of a recession is wrong.
How is that not redefining recession?
Because that's not the definition.
What we're seeing is that we are in a transition.
We've entered a new phase in our recovery.
Virtually nothing signals that this period in the second quarter is recessionary.
That doesn't sound like a recession to me.
Okay, so the rules have changed for no particular reason other than they're just looking at other standards. They're looking at other pieces of the economy that they say are doing well, like low unemployment, and saying that changes the rules entirely.
Yeah, I guess they believe if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. But imagine, Meghan, if Donald Trump tried to do the same thing. What if Trump were president and we had 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, and then Donald Trump tried to redefine recession to claim that we were not in one? Do you think the media would go along with that?
Mm-hmm. Correct. No, never. And the media is going along with it because those are the Biden administration officials. I mean, including Janet Yellen, right? Like, it's not the technical definition to say that 2 quarters of contraction is a recession. Since when?
It is.
Since when?
It is the technical definition. That's the definition. And, even Fed Chair Powell, they got to him. They were able to intimidate him. So anybody who thinks the Fed is independent, now you have Chair Powell claiming that 2 negative quarters is not a recession and we're not in a recession. But Meghan, 2 negative quarters is just a minimum for a recession. We're going to get a 3rd negative quarter. We're going to get a 4th negative quarter. We're going to be seeing contracting GDP for years. This recession is just getting started. And the increase in unemployment is coming. People that are pointing to the low unemployment rate and saying this means we're not in recession, that's nonsense. Unemployment is a lagging indicator. The unemployment rate is going to rise as the recession continues. But also, Meghan, they're trying to claim that we're not in a recession because we have a strong labor market. We don't. We have a very weak labor market. Real wages are collapsing. Wages have never really fallen this much in real terms in history. That is a weak labor market. When you have a strong labor market, workers can demand raises. They have power. They can go to their bosses and say, I want more money, or I'm going to quit and take another job. That's not happening. Workers are being forced to work for pay cuts. In fact, a lot of workers are taking second jobs and third jobs because they can't make ends meet on their main job. That is a weak labor market.
So you're saying when inflation's at 9.1% and you're only getting a 5% raise, what you've really had is a 4% pay cut, and that's not a strong labor market.
Correct. I mean, let's say we had inflation and a strong labor market, which is what they're pretending. If inflation was 9%, workers would be getting 12% pay raises. They would be ahead of inflation. The fact that they're accepting raises that are much smaller than inflation shows that this is a weak labor market. Workers have no power. They are forced to accept lower wages because the labor market is so weak.
Before we get into that, because I do want to ask you a little bit more about the wages, on the administration contradictions, I just want to point this out. All right, first there is Biden's National Economic Council Director, Brian Deese. In March of 2008, I think he was working for the Biden administration, he said, economists have a technical definition of recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Now, he's with Biden, 2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of recession. So which is it? I mean, it's a 100%, 180 reversal by him. Biden's chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Cecilia Rose, in May of 2022, 2 quarters of negative growth is an indicator of recession. Now, as of July 21st in a White House blog post, what is a recession? Some say it's 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP. And she goes on to say that's neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. She just said in May, 2 quarters of negative growth is an indicator of recession. Then you got Jared
Meghan,
Bernstein. He's the economic advisor. Wait, I got two more. September of 19, he says a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining growth. Now, that idea is, quote, wrong. And then you got Heather Bosey, his economic advisor. May 2019, a recession refers to 2 quarters of negative growth in GDP. Now, that does not necessarily indicate we're in a recession. Okay. Peter, I can't.
Well, look, I'm 59 years old, all right? And I have never in my life heard a recession defined any other way other than 2 negative quarters of GDP. That's the definition, because recession refers to whether or not the GDP is expanding or contracting. It doesn't refer to the level of unemployment or the level of inflation. It specifically is there to reference what is happening with GDP. Right? That's how they define economic growth. I mean, I have a lot of problems with GDP, but that's how recession has been defined. Recovery is when the GDP is expanding. Recession is when it's contracting. That's it. And if you've got 2 negative quarters in a row, you're in a recession. Now, maybe it's a shallow recession. Maybe it's going to be over quickly. Now, I don't think so. I think we're just early in this recession. I think the 3rd quarter is going to be even weaker than the first 2. In fact, I think they're going to revise the 2nd quarter number even lower. And I was not surprised by that negative number. I expected it. And in fact, last year, I expected the 1st quarter to be negative. I was forecasting that the U.S. economy would be in recession in the first half of 2022 back in 2021. And by the way, back in 2021, I was also forecasting that inflation was not transitory and that it would get worse. I said inflation would strengthen and the economy would weaken. We would have stagflation. And that is exactly what we have.
You also said that Elon Musk would not buy Twitter and that if he did do it, it would be an economic mistake for him. And we had you on for both of those. And it turns out you were right about those predictions. So just as an aside. All right, let me.
Well,
let me
that was an easy one.
Well, I mean, you kind of stood alone on it. So to your credit, you were right. Let me ask you about this. I don't totally understand it, but I would like to. In the Dispatch, which is a news service, right-leaning, Jonah Goldberg and others, they're talking about the employment numbers and worker compensation, okay, and how it rose. Worker pay rose 5.1% in the second quarter, which was not enough to match inflation, as you and I just discussed. But they say, but that's strong growth beat economists' predictions. Then they conclude as follows: that is likely to make the Fed uneasy because it hints at the possibility of a wage price spiral, meaning when companies pass on the expense of higher wages to consumers by raising prices, motivating these consumers to seek still more pay raises and kicking off a vicious inflationary cycle. Can you opine on this wage price spiral, and are indeed employers passing on these higher wages to consumers in the form of prices?
The wage price spiral is another fiction created by government in the 1970s to try to blame the private sector for the inflation they created. Inflation is not created by workers demanding raises. It's not created by companies raising prices. It's created by the government expanding the money supply. That's the literal definition of inflation. It's an expansion of the money supply. It's the money supply that is being inflated. And when you inflate the money supply, prices go up. Wages are just another price. They are the price of labor. But just because nominal wages go up 5%, if inflation is 9%, that doesn't mean workers are ahead. And in fact, the wage number is likely accurate. The price number is not. The real increase in consumer prices is probably 18%, not 9%. That means real wages are collapsing. And that's one of the reasons that in the most recent economic data that we got last week, the savings rate is now at the lowest level since mid-2009. It collapsed down to 5.1. What was happening to the economy in mid-2009? We were in the Great Recession. So the last time we had a savings rate this low, we were in a huge recession. Why is the savings rate so low? Because the recession is forcing workers to dip into their savings to pay their bills because their pay increases aren't enough.
Now, in the Biden administration's defense, the stock market is doing very well. Stocks rallied in the past week, and major stock market indexes ended July with their best monthly performance of the year. The S&P 500, the Dow scored their best month since November 2020. NASDAQ's best monthly performance since April of 2020. So those are good things. And Joe Biden, well, that's what Joe Biden would like you to look at the stock market now as one sign that he's doing better than we're being told.
Well,
and he basically
Meghan,
came out.
We're in a bear market. The bear market rally notwithstanding, we're still in a bear market. But the only reason the stock market has rallied is because the economy is so weak. See, what's driving the stock market rally is the idea that because the economy is so weak, the Fed is going to pivot, that the Fed is not going to keep raising interest rates. It's going to be forced to stop hiking rates and maybe cut rates to stimulate the economy. So the reason the stock market has rallied is because we're in a recession. So it's hard for Biden to kind of point to the stock market as indicative of his success when it actually is indicative of his failure.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, here's what he says. He says, number one, we have a record job market at 3.6% unemployment. That's like their biggest argument, is that very few people who want jobs don't have one. We've created, he keeps saying this, 9 million new jobs so far just since I've become president. He credits himself for every job people left and then refilled after the COVID lockdown opened up. Businesses are investing in America at record rates, foreign businesses and so on. He points to this CHIPS Act he's doing where we're investing in semiconductor investments, trying to make more of those here domestically, which was a bipartisan push. And we'll get to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that Manchin just agreed to in our second block. So let's table that one for the moment. But what do you make of 3.6% unemployment? We've created 9 million jobs and businesses are investing in America, and all of that puts the lie to the word recession.
Yeah, look, Biden just lies. I mean, that's what he does. I mean, that should be no surprise. They lie about everything. At least he's consistent in that. But sure, the official unemployment rate is 3.6%. But The unofficial rate is much higher than that because there are a lot of people that are not employed, but are not counted as being unemployed. And we still have a very low labor force participation rate. And so I look at that number as kind of being a meaningless lagging indicator. It is about to rise because, you know, Meghan, a lot of companies were reluctant to lay people off over the past 6 months. They were hopeful that what they were looking at was a temporary downturn. They were hoping that inflation was transitory, that we would avoid recession, because employers don't want to lay people off. It's expensive. You know, you train people, you invest money in your workers. You don't want to just get rid of them unless you really know you need to. But I think now that the economy is so bad and it's obviously getting worse, I think a lot of these companies that were holding on to their workers, I think they're going to start letting them go. And so you're going to see a big increase in layoffs. We're already seeing that in first-time jobless claims, which are now above 250,000. They actually peaked above 260,000 the prior week. This is the highest since the fall of last year. That's a leading indicator, unlike the unemployment rate, which is a lagging indicator. And the idea that Biden created any jobs, I mean, that's ridiculous. He didn't create anything. You basically had a bunch of jobs before he became president where we told all the workers, temporarily leave your job. Go home, don't work. We're going to pay you a bunch of money not to work, so sit at home and stay at home. Now Biden walks into office and now we tell all those workers, hey, you know the jobs that we told you to leave? You got to go back to them. So people are going back to the jobs they temporarily left. And now Biden is saying, oh, look at me. I created all these jobs.
Right.
He hasn't created anything.
Right.
I'm sure if Biden wasn't president, we might have actually created jobs. Instead, because of his policies, we probably have fewer jobs, and the jobs that we have pay less.
It's definitely a sleight of hand. Even I can see that as a non-economist. It's pretty simple. But this, the biggest headline while I was away was clearly this Manchin deal on this ill-named Inflation Reduction Act. And there's a lot to say about this. I've been fascinated to see like what it's going to do to corporations in terms of their taxes, what it's going to do to people earning less than $200,000 in terms of their taxes, how much money is going into what Michael Schellenberger describes as not green technology, but brown technology of solar and wind, which has enormous consequences to the environment and otherwise that we're just pretending doesn't exist. And yet it appears likely to pass. So what's that going to do to everybody's wallet that's already suffering? And what's it going to do with respect to the Democrats' electoral hopes? Because shoring up their very green left, I mean, I guess may have been a problem for them, but they're really lagging in the middle. So we'll see whether politically that's going to help them or not. But we're going to talk about the economics of it when we come back with Peter right after this very quick break. Don't go away. Are the high fuel costs putting a damper on your summer vacation plans, or the fact that we are now in a recession? You got higher prices at the pump, you got airfares pumping up, and it is getting more expensive to get away for a week. But what if you could soak up those vacation vibes year round? Get a Michael Phelps swim spa by Master Spas. Whether you want to stay close to home this summer or just want to extend your break, a Michael Phelps swim spa by Master Spas can transform your backyard into an oasis. It combines the benefits of a pool with the therapy of a hot tub. This will reinvent your family time. You'll love it, and your family and friends will too. Michael Phelps swim spas by Master Spas come in a variety of sizes to complement almost any yard, even if it's a small one. And since it's heated, you can use it year round in any climate. Michael Phelps swim spas are 100% made in the USA by Master Spas, the world's largest swim spa manufacturer. Go to masterspas.com. Put in the promo code MK to save $1,000 on a Michael Phelps swim spa or $500 on a Master Spas hot tub. That's masterspas.com, promo code MK. So, Peter, we get this Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which is a lie. I mean, that is just branding, forcing people like me to say what Joe Biden wants people to think. But I'll tell the audience, honestly, that's a lie. It's not an Inflation Reduction Act. It's a gift to Biden's green energy supporters who wanted him to do something, anything, on wind and solar. And now you have, folks like the Times referring to this as like the largest legislative climate investment the U.S. has ever made. It aims to reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030, which it won't do, say independent experts. Roughly $30 billion in credits for domestic manufacturing of, quote, clean energy components, including solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and so on. And it does. I mean, the one good thing about it that Michael Schellenberger has been pointing out is it does also include some credits for nuclear. So that's good. They seem to be getting a little bit more open-minded to the fact that nuclear is also a clean energy. It's a true clean energy. But that doesn't offset any of the financial problems associated with this enormous spending bill at a time when we're already suffering from record inflation due to too much government spending, due in large part to too much government spending. And the taxes in here on businesses are pretty staggering, not to mention what they say will be the taxes on people who make under $200,000. The Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation says taxes on those people are going to jump $16.7 billion in 2023. So this will be a huge tax hike on people earning under 200. Your thoughts on it?
Well, it's unfortunate that we don't have a law that requires truth in legislating. But, if you want to know the effect of any kind of bill that Congress is, going to pass or the president's going to sign, it's easy. You just look at the title and you just think the opposite. So this bill is titled the Inflation Reduction Act. That means the bill is going to make inflation higher. That's always the case, right? If they have a tax simplification plan, it's going to make the tax system more complicated. It's always the opposite. And that's exactly what this bill is going to do. If it's signed into law, it will make inflation worse. Inflation will go up. It will not go down. And that's because you do not fight inflation by increasing government spending. You do not fight inflation by raising taxes on businesses. Because when you raise taxes on corporations, businesses, what you end up doing is getting less investment and you reduce supply. So less stuff gets produced and that puts more upward pressure on prices. When the government spends more money, that's more demand and that's putting more upward pressure on prices. The only legislation that the government could pass that would reduce inflation would be significant cuts in government spending, right? That would reduce or eliminate the budget deficits so that the Fed no longer had to monetize them. Also, the government could substantially repeal all sorts of rules and regulations that are currently running up the cost of doing business. And so if they reduce those costs, then businesses could pass on those savings to their customers. If they want to try to go after inflation through tax hikes, the only tax hikes that might work would be taxes that are targeted to the middle class and the poor, because you have to reduce demand. You have to reduce spending. Obviously, if you raise taxes on the middle class, they have less money to spend. But they're not going to do that. And of course, I don't prefer that. I would rather have government cut spending. But if it's not going to cut spending, the only choice is to raise taxes. If they do neither, then inflation is going to continue and get worse.
Well, I mean, maybe they're onto something because, again, according to this nonpartisan data being cited by Senate Republicans, the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, they will be raising taxes on people making less than 200, as I said, by $16.7 billion. They'll jump another $14.1 billion on taxpayers who make between 200 and 500. And the Democrats' response to this is to say, well, that analysis is not complete because it doesn't include all the wonderful goodies that we're going to be getting from middle-class families in terms of making health insurance premiums and prescription drugs more affordable, and all the great clean energy incentives for families. The clean energy incentives, that's something Schellenberger has been saying all along. That's a lie. They always spend all this money. It doesn't save you anything.
More affordable. Everything the government gets involved in becomes more expensive and less affordable. The way to get things to be more affordable is to get the government out of the way. It's a competitive free market that brings prices down and makes things affordable. Whenever the government gets involved, it screws everything up, it runs up the costs, and stuff gets more expensive. There isn't a single example throughout history in this country or any other country where government got involved in an industry and it made that industry more efficient and it lowered prices. Only the free market has a history of doing that.
Mm-hmm. The administration thinks this is a massive win, and you've got Politico now declaring Biden is back in the game. They say the president is suddenly on the verge of a turnaround that the White House believes could salvage his summer and alter the trajectory of his presidency. All he needs to do now is close. And that means getting Kirsten Sinema to sign on to this and then to take the victory lap that the media will be all too happy to provide him.
Look, all Biden is doing and the Democrats, they're taking advantage of the fact that the public is upset about inflation. So they take a bill that is not going to reduce inflation, that will actually make it worse. They name it the Inflation Reduction Act. And now that they have an act with a title that nobody wants to vote against because everybody is in favor of reducing inflation, and then they load it up with a bunch of pork. And that's basically what this is. It's an excuse to enable the Democrats to get all this pork barrel legislation passed by promising the public it's going to lower inflation when it's actually going to make inflation higher.
They have, just to put some numbers on it, Wall Street Journal editorial board out very much against this bill for many of the reasons you cite. They say if their aim is to reduce inflation by chilling business investment and the economy, nailed it. $433 billion in climate and healthcare spending. It's sort of like, what's the healthcare spending doing in there? $615 billion in new taxes and drug price control, quote, savings. They're pointing out how the new tax is going to increase the cost of business investment. And that actually, according to the Tax Foundation, the coal industry is going to be the hardest hit. That's Manchin's hometown, right? He's from West Virginia. So what's he doing? That companies are going to get tax credits for spending on wind, solar, minerals, as I mentioned, nuclear, yes, quote, sustainable aviation fuel and so on, electric vehicle charging stations. But that they say the Biden administration is using regulation to essentially mandate that automakers churn out electric vehicles. And now the taxpayers are going to subsidize that cost, which they can ill afford to do.
You know, the best thing that happened to the Biden administration is that Joe Manchin stopped the Build Back Better bill. Because you imagine how much worse things would be if that thing had been passed?
Mm-hmm. Well, he seems to be saying this is a mini Build Back Better, but that it's much better than Build Back Better, that people are going to like it more.
It's less worse. I wouldn't say that it's good, but yes, it's not as bad. And I think there is a lot of pressure on Manchin with the midterms coming up to kind of play ball. After all, he is a Democrat. So unless he's going to switch parties, he's got to throw him some kind of a bone. Mm-hmm. So it looks like he's going to cave on this. But it's not nearly as bad as the bill that he blocked, that's for sure.
What do you make of the 15% corporate minimum tax, which is what they're going to do? They want to raise revenues for the legislation by raising, the 15% corporate minimum tax. And they say that's going to raise $313 billion through 2031.
Yeah. I am
so
opposed to any of these minimum taxes because we have a corporate income tax. And if a corporation doesn't have any tax, it's because it doesn't have any taxable income. So you can't say, hey, you didn't make enough income, so we're going to tax something that isn't income and call it income so that we can force you to pay 15% on it. I think the whole thing is illegal. I think it's unconstitutional. I think if you have an income tax and you have, brackets, and if a company doesn't make enough income to be subject to the tax, well, then it doesn't have to pay the tax. But of course, personally, I would abolish the corporate income tax. I don't think we should have any corporate income tax because corporations don't pay taxes. They're paid by shareholders, they're paid by their workers, and they're paid by their customers. The corporation itself doesn't pay anything. So why not eliminate the corporate tax altogether and just have one level of taxation? On the shareholders, when they get their dividends or their capital gains, they're already taxing the workers on their paychecks. The customers pay taxes. They have their own income taxes. Just get rid of the corporate income tax. We shouldn't have it. Now, of course, if it was up to me, we'd have no personal income tax either. I'm opposed to all forms of taxation based on income. I think it's an unconstitutional tax. I think it's a destructive tax economically. But certainly it makes no sense to have a corporate income tax if you already have a personal income tax.
Well, we'll see how the public feels about this and whether they agree with Politico that, Biden's back And Democrats are feeling a new sense of optimism going into the midterms if this gets through as it's expected to, though, there's still some questions given cinema and so on. Back to the messaging on it and the politics of it. I know you tweeted about this, and it's one of the sound bites we played. The Treasury Secretary's out there saying that what we're in is a state of transition, not recession. And I saw you saying something to the effect of, okay, we're now at the point where you've got the Treasury Secretary suggesting that, recession is just a transitory thing. It's like yet another stage of our recovery. That's what she wants us to believe.
Well, they said the same thing about inflation, right? They like that word transitory. Inflation was transitory. The recession is transitory. It's not even a recession. We're just transitioning. They're right. We're transitioning from growth to recession. That's what the transition was. And now we're in recession. We've been in recession all year, and the recession is going to get much worse now that it's officially begun. And, the Fed is still hiking interest rates. Inflation is still pushing prices higher. So there's no reason for the economy to strengthen. All of the forces that have been pushing the economy down are accelerating and are going to bear even harder on the weakening economy.
Okay, which leads me to, does this work? Because if you look at how people are feeling about the economy, they're getting it. They understand it's not good. And just some of the latest numbers there, they polled consumer confidence, Gallup did recently, and it's hit its lowest level since 2009 in the economy. 85% of people surveyed also predict things are about to get worse. They know it's bad and they know it's getting worse. And so I wonder, how do you square that circle, right?
Yeah.
Like,
look,
they can't just stand up there saying over and over.
It walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. It's a duck. The last time consumers were this pessimistic, we were in a recession. Also, look at Joe Biden's approval rating. Just hit a new low. I think it's down to 38. But if you look at his average approval rating for the first 6 quarters of his presidency, it is the lowest of any president in history. Yeah. So why is Biden so unpopular? Maybe it's because the economy is in recession. And maybe the fact that he's denying that is going to make him look even worse in the eyes of the voters. At least he could do is be a Bill Clinton and feel our pain. But instead, he's oblivious to the pain. He's telling people that there is no pain. Well, no. I think there's going to be a lot of pain for Democrats at the polls in November because I think this strategy is going to backfire.
Here's what I think it was Biden who said. If you ask people how they're doing, they say, great, I'm doing well. If you ask people, how's the economy doing, they say, oh, it's terrible. So he thinks he's going to benefit off the fact that most people, he believes are employed. He believes aren't feeling the pinch. Well, why, if most people aren't feeling the pinch, why are they all shopping at the dollar store now? Where they used to be, it's not like they were all at the most fancy store in town. They were at Target, right? But now they can't afford Target. So why? So if they're all so jolly about their personal circumstances, why do we see this number from Gallup, and why do we see the Wall Street Journal report on the dollar stores?
Well, I think Biden has a biased sample. He's probably asking his buddies that work in Washington, D.C. and people in the Biden administration. And yeah, they're doing good. They've got, fat government paychecks. They're living off the public trough. So all the people that Biden is talking to, yeah, I'm sure they're doing great. But he's not talking to real people who are struggling with collapsing real wages, with depleted savings, watching their grocery bills, their gas bills, their rent, their mortgage payments, their insurance costs. Everything is going up. And again, people are struggling, having to take second and third jobs. You have a lot of people who are no longer retired because they can't afford retirement anymore. So now they're being forced to take these low-paying jobs. This is a horrible economy. The bad news is it's going to get a lot worse.
What about gas prices? Because they've fallen. They're down now $4.22 a gallon, which is still astronomical, but it's not as bad as it was a couple of months ago. And the administration has been touting that as, see, we're making progress, withhold judgment.
Well, nothing goes up in a straight line. I mean, oil prices have pulled back. They're going to make new highs. And remember, we are dumping millions and millions of barrels of oil into the market out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Well, at some point, that reserve is going to run dry. There's going to be nothing left to sell. And then we're in a lot of trouble because then prices are going to skyrocket. And that's going to happen anyway. Once the dollar really rolls over, the dollar has strengthened during this inflationary period, ironically, because inflation is about the dollar losing purchasing power. But on international foreign exchange market, the dollar has been bid up because people are optimistic that the Fed will succeed in getting rid of inflation with rate hikes, and that's pushed up the dollar. But when the markets realize that the Fed failed, that it surrendered and inflation won because the Fed has to go back and try to stimulate a weak economy, I think the dollar is going to tank. Excuse me.
Yeah, take your time. Well, it's actually a good chance for me to squeeze in just a quick question.
I think the dollar is going to tank, and that's going to really push inflation up. I mean, oil prices up to a much higher level because oil is priced in dollars. And so the strong dollar has helped keep the price of oil down. But when we get a weak dollar, that's going to propel the price of oil much higher. I mean, if oil rose to $130 a barrel with a strong dollar, it could go to $200 a barrel with a weak dollar.
Oh, gosh. So in our last, 30, 40 seconds, what should people expect in terms of jobs, housing, and overall economy?
Well, as I said, this recession is going to get much worse. Inflation is going to keep driving prices higher. Rates are going to go higher. That's going to increase the cost of servicing debt and further undermine the economy. Plus, higher interest rates are another cost of doing business that has to get passed on. So the economy is going to get worse. The housing market, obviously, if you look at home prices, even adjusted for inflation, they're at all-time record highs. They're higher than they were at the peak of the bubble back in 2006. And so housing prices have to come down. In real terms, they will come crashing down. It's always hard to say what will happen in nominal terms because there's going to be so much inflation. But I think that as the recession gets worse, inflation's not going to go away. A lot of people think that the recession will at least cure the inflation problem. It won't. It's actually going to make the inflation problem much worse. So think about what's coming. It's going to be even higher inflation and a much worse recession. A lot of people that have jobs now are going to lose jobs. But even the people who don't lose their jobs are going to have to deal with significant pay cuts because in this weak labor market, most workers are not going to be able to get wage increases.
Okay. Peter, we're out of time.
The increase in the cost of living.
Thank you for being here, and we'll do it all over again soon.